A jailer measures out the poison. The old man watches without shaking. He is barefoot. He is 70 years old. He is famously ugly. And before sunset, Athens will make him drink his own death. For 24 centuries, people have repeated the clean version. Athens killed philosophy. A democracy panicked, a mob hated wisdom, and Socrates became a martyr for asking questions. That version is beautiful. It is also too innocent. Athens did not execute a harmless philosopher because he annoyed the gods. It executed the one man who kept forcing the city to look at the men it had once let destroy it. The charge said impiety. The charge said corrupting the young. But the grudge was written somewhere else. In the rubble of the long walls, in the graves of the Sicilian expedition, in the blood left by the 30 tyrants, and in an oath of amnesty that made direct revenge illegal. So Athens found another language for revenge. It dressed politics in the robe of religion. Forget the Athens of white marble and museum light. In 399 BC, Athens is not shining. Athens is humiliated. 5 years earlier, it surrendered to Sparta after almost 30 years of war. The empire was gone. The tribute was gone. The fleet that once ruled the Aegean was gone. The port of Piraeus, once packed with triremes and sailors, had gone quiet. Then came the most humiliating sound in Athenian memory: flutes. Under Spartan orders, the long walls that connected Athens to its harbor were torn down while music played. Ancient tradition says the enemies of Athens celebrated as the stones fell. To the Athenians, it was not demolition. It was a public funeral for their power. The men walking through the agora in 399 BC were not calm citizens debating abstract ideas. They were survivors of blockade, plague, hunger, defeat, civil terror, and betrayal. Defeated cities do not remember calmly. They remember faces, they remember names. And sooner or later, they start asking who made them lose. The first wound opened long before the trial. In the second year of the Peloponnesian War, disease came into Athens through the crowded port. The city had packed refugees behind its walls, trusting strategy, empire, and the gods to save it. Then the bodies started falling. Thucydides, who caught the disease and survived, wrote about corpses around the fountains, funeral pyres stolen by desperate families, doctors dying beside their patients, and a city losing not only people, but restraint. Roughly a third of the population died. Pericles died too, the statesman who had made Athens believe it was chosen for greatness. And something darker died with him. Fear of the gods weakened because sacrifice had not saved anyone. Fear of the law weakened because a man who might die tomorrow does not worry much about punishment next year. This is the city where Socrates spent decades teaching young aristocrats to question every sacred word Athens used to describe itself: virtue, justice, democracy, the gods. At the time, it sounded like philosophy. After the city collapsed, it would sound like the beginning of treason. Now stop and look at the accused, not the marble bust, the real man. Socrates is old, poor, barefoot, and impossible to ignore. He has fought for Athens as a hoplite. At Potidaea, tradition says, he saved the life of a dazzling young aristocrat named Alcibiades. Remember that name. It will come back like a knife. At Delium, when the Athenian line broke, Socrates did not run like a frightened old man. Ancient witnesses remembered him walking away with such calm that attackers hesitated to touch him. This was not a professor hiding in a school. This was a combat veteran who had earned the right to speak in the city he irritated. And irritated he did. He stopped politicians, poets, generals, craftsmen, and ambitious young men in public. Then he asked questions until their confidence came apart in front of witnesses. To his followers, he was a moral surgeon. To his enemies, he was the wound that would not close. Athens tolerated him for decades. Then Athens lost everything, and suddenly the old man did not look harmless anymore. The trial of Socrates was never only about Socrates. There were ghosts in that courtroom. The first ghost was Alcibiades, beautiful, brilliant, rich, and catastrophically ambitious. He had been close to Socrates. He had also pushed Athens toward the Sicilian expedition, one of the worst military disasters in ancient history. Ships vanished. Soldiers died. Prisoners rotted in the quarries of Syracuse. Then Alcibiades fled, first to Sparta, then toward Persia, then back again, changing loyalty like a cloak. The second ghost was Critias, poet, aristocrat, cold political mind, a man connected to Socrates' intellectual world, who later became one of the leaders of the 30 tyrants. When Sparta installed the 30 in Athens, theory became terror. Citizens were executed. Property was seized. Families fled. In only 8 months, the regime left a scar deep enough to poison a generation. The third ghost was Charmides, tied to the same aristocratic circle and to the oligarchic side that democracy had fought to remove. Were these men simply students in the modern classroom sense? No. Plato and Xenophon would spend their lives trying to separate Socrates from their crimes. But politics does not wait for perfect footnotes. In the democratic imagination, the pattern was simple enough. The men around Socrates had not merely questioned democracy, some of them had helped destroy it. If you want ancient history without the museum glass, subscribe. Because the real crime is almost never the one written on the tablet. Here is the key to the whole trial. In 403 BC, after democracy returned, Athens swore an amnesty. No prosecutions for the political crimes of the 30. It was wise. It probably saved the city from another civil war. But it also buried rage underground. Critias was dead. Alcibiades was dead. The men who had helped the oligarchs were protected by the oath. You could not legally put the nightmare itself on trial. So the anger waited for another shape. And then the opening appeared. The oath made revenge for politics dangerous. But it did not forbid a trial for impiety. It did not forbid a trial for corrupting the young. The amnesty protected the past. It did not protect the man accused of manufacturing Athens' future traitors. 3 men brought the case. Meletus, a young poet, gave the indictment its religious face. Lycon added another public voice. But the heaviest presence was Anytus. Anytus was a powerful Democrat, a supporter of the restored regime, and a man who had suffered under oligarchic rule. Many historians see him as the force behind the prosecution. He did not need to prove Socrates had ordered treason. He needed the jury to feel that Socrates had poisoned the soil where traitors grew. Meletus spoke the words. Anytus supplied the rage. To modern ears, corrupting the youth sounds vague. To an Athenian juror in 399 BC, it was explosive. It meant teaching the sons of the rich to despise the city that fed them. It meant training clever aristocrats to laugh at the vote, at officials chosen by lot, at the idea that a potter or leather worker could have the same political voice as a nobleman. Socrates asked a deadly question. If we do not choose a ship's pilot by lottery, why choose the men who steer the state that way? Before the war, that was clever. After oligarchs connected to his circle had murdered Democrats, it sounded like sabotage. They called it corrupting the youth. They heard, he taught our sons to hate the democracy their fathers died restoring. Now reconstruct the court. Do not imagine robes, lawyers, appeals, and a judge protecting procedure. Imagine a machine made of citizens. The usual reconstruction is 501 jurors, chosen by lot. They are not specialists. They are the city itself. A water clock drains the speaker's time. Each juror holds bronze discs, one for guilt, one for acquittal. In front of them stands Socrates. Behind him in memory stand the men lost in Sicily, the citizens killed by the 30, and 3 names the amnesty could no longer reach: Alcibiades, Critias, Charmides. The official target was Socrates. The real defendants had already escaped the courtroom. Socrates could have survived this. He could have wept. He could have brought his wife and sons before the jury. He could have asked the city to see an old veteran instead of an enemy. He refused. According to Plato, he told them about Delphi. His friend Chaerephon had asked the oracle whether anyone was wiser than Socrates. The oracle said no. So Socrates spent his life testing men who claimed wisdom. One by one, he found them hollow. Then he gave Athens the image that would survive forever. He was the gadfly. Athens was the great sluggish horse. The god had sent him to sting it awake. Brilliant philosophy, terrible courtroom strategy. The city wanted humility. Socrates gave it a mirror. Then came the first vote. The bronze discs dropped into the urns, and Socrates almost survived. Plato says the vote was close enough that about 30 changed ballots would have acquitted him. Later tradition gives the famous numbers, but the exact count matters less than the shape. Athens was split. This was not one mob screaming for blood. Some saw a corrupter, some saw an irritating but loyal citizen, some may have seen a scapegoat, but the guilty discs won. Now each side had to propose a penalty. Meletus proposed death. Socrates needed to give the jury any respectable way out. Instead, he lit the room on fire. Socrates stood again and told Athens what he deserved. Not prison, not exile, not a serious fine. Free meals in the Prytaneum. That was where the city honored Olympic champions, ambassadors, and public benefactors. Socrates had just been convicted of harming Athens, and he answered as if Athens owed him a reward. Maybe to him, this was not sarcasm. Maybe it was the purest truth he had left. He believed he had served the city by waking it up. But the jury heard something else. You call me guilty. I call myself your benefactor. You call me dangerous. I say you should feed me like a hero. Only later did he offer a fine. Too late. Athens had not been certain it wanted him dead. Then Socrates refused to bow. Socrates did not die that day. A sacred ship had sailed to Delos, and while it was away, Athens could not carry out executions. So the prison waited. The cup waited. For about 30 days, Socrates lived as a man already sentenced. That delay makes the story colder. This was not a riot, not a blade drawn in anger. Athens had time to understand what it had chosen. Friends visited the cell. The harbor watched for the sacred ship. Plato shows Xanthippe, his wife, distraught with their child. Strip away later caricature. There is only a woman holding a child while the city calmly schedules her husband's death. Then Crito came before dawn with a way out. The guards could be persuaded. Money had been gathered. A safe place waited outside Athens. Socrates could leave the cell and die years later as an old nuisance in another city. For almost any man, that was the obvious ending. For Socrates, it was impossible. In Plato's Crito, he imagines the laws of Athens speaking like parents. He had lived under those laws for 70 years. If he broke them only when they turned against him, what would that prove? So he stayed. His enemies wanted him removed. He made himself unforgettable. When the sacred ship returned, the sentence could finally be carried out. The poison was hemlock. Plato says Socrates drank steadily, walked until his legs grew heavy, then lay down. The coldness rose from his feet, sensation disappeared. His body failed upward. Modern readers have questioned whether Plato's scene is too clean, too perfect for the teacher he loved, but the image survived because it is impossible to forget. The old man, the cup, the friends watching, the city outside pretending this was only law. Then came the last words. Crito, we owe a rooster to Asclepius. Do not forget to pay the debt. Asclepius was the god of healing. Was death the cure from life? A private vow? Plato's final symbol? We do not know, but the irony is savage. A city once broken by plague had just killed the man who claimed to be its medicine. Later legends tried to clean the ending. Athens regretted it. The accusers were punished. A statue was raised. Maybe some Athenians did regret it, but the harder truth is stronger. Athens survived. Democracy survived. Plato wrote. Xenophon remembered. And Socrates, silenced by the state, became louder dead than he had ever been alive. The trial was not only about gods, not only about philosophy. It was about a city that lost a war, survived tyranny, swore not to take revenge, and then found one man who still connected all the forbidden memories. The legal charge was impiety. The emotional charge was memory. Athens did not kill philosophy. Athens killed the mirror, because the mirror reflected the question the city could not bear. Who destroyed us? Now sit on the bench with the bronze discs. Guilty, acquit, or exile. Cast your verdict in the comments.